The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Delia Hartwell carried the last of her boxes down the apartment stairs and set them on the wet curb, where the cardboard immediately began to sag and darken at the corners. She was 29 years old, and everything she owned in the world now fit into the back of a rusted hatchback that wheezed when it idled and stalled at every third red light. Her daughter Posy, 6 years old and small for her age, sat in the front passenger seat with her knees drawn up to her chest, watching her mother through the rain-streaked windshield with the kind of patient, unblinking attention that children develop when they have learned not to ask too many questions. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The eviction notice had been taped to the door for 2 weeks before the sheriff finally came, and even then Delia had begged for one more day, one more hour, anything, and the man had not been cruel about it, just tired, the way everyone seemed tired now, as if the whole city had been holding its breath for years and had finally given up on exhaling. She loaded the last box, climbed into the driver's seat, and sat there with her hands on the wheel, not yet turning the key, watching the only home Posy had ever known shrink behind them in the side mirror. "Are we going on an adventure?" Posy asked, because that was the word Delia had used that morning, an adventure, the way you say things to a child to keep the fear out of their eyes. "Yeah, baby," Delia said. A big one. She had not lied to her daughter, exactly. There was a kind of adventure waiting for them, though it had arrived in the shape of an envelope rather than a map. 3 weeks earlier, when the eviction was already a certainty and Delia had been calling shelters that were full and relatives who had stopped answering, a letter had come from a law office in a town she had never heard of for 100 miles north, a place called Marrow that sat at the edge of a county so rural the nearest grocery store was a 40-minute drive. The letter was thick and formal and full of words that took her 3 readings to understand, but the core of it was simple enough. A woman named Eleanor Vance had died, and she had left Delia something. Delia had never met Eleanor Vance. She had never heard the name. But the lawyer, a Mr. Abernathy whose handwriting on the envelope was as careful as engraving, explained that Eleanor was a cousin of Delia's grandmother, a great-great-aunt by marriage, the last living thread of a family branch that had withered to nothing, and that in the absence of any closer kin, the old woman's estate passed to Delia. The estate, the letter said, consisted of a house and the land it stood on, and a small sum to cover the back taxes, which had been settled by the estate before the transfer, so that Delia would inherit the property free and clear except for one condition. The house had been sealed for 11 years, locked and shuttered and untouched since the day Eleanor Vance had walked out of it, and the terms of the will required that Delia take possession of it personally, in person, and that she could not sell it for a period of 1 full year. It had seemed, at first, like a cruel joke. A house she could not sell, in a town she could not find on most maps, for 100 miles from the only life she had ever built. But she had no life left to speak of, and a house, however far, however strange, was a roof. A roof was more than she had. And so when the lawyer's letter included a line about the property being valued, for tax purposes, at $250, Delia had laughed out loud, a short bitter bark of a laugh, alone in her empty apartment, because $250 was less than what the city charged to tow a car, and a house worth $250 was not a house at all. It was a ruin. It was a thing they had given her, because no one else would take it. But it was hers. She started the car. The engine caught on the second try, and she pulled away from the curb into the gray sheeting rain, and Posy reached over and put her small hand on her mother's arm, and they drove north. The drive took the better part of 2 days because the car could not be trusted to go faster than 50 without shuddering, and because Delia did not have money for a motel, so they slept the first night in a rest stop parking lot with the seats reclined and Posy's coat spread over both of them like a thin shared blanket. Delia did not sleep much. She lay in the dark listening to the trucks come and go, their engines like distant surf, and she thought about Eleanor Vance, this woman she had never known who had reached out across the gap of death to hand her a key. Why her? There must have been others. There were always others. But the lawyer had been clear. The line had run out everywhere else, and Delia was what remained, the last name on a tree that had otherwise dropped all its leaves. She thought about her mother, dead now for years, and her grandmother before that. Women who had worked themselves into the ground and left nothing behind but debt, and the particular kind of stubbornness that Delia recognized in herself. The refusal to lie down, even when lying down would have been easier. She thought about Posy's father, who had left when Posy was 2 and had not been heard from since. A man whose face she could barely summon anymore, as if he had been a weather system that passed through and moved on. And she thought, lying there in the dark with her daughter breathing softly against her shoulder, that whatever waited for them at the end of this road, it could not be worse than what they were. Leaving. That was the thought that finally let her sleep. It could not be worse. They reached Marrow's End in the late afternoon of the second day, as the light was going copper and long across the hills. The town was barely a town at all, a single main street with a hardware store and a diner and a church and a gas station, and then the houses thinning out into farmland and forest, and the roads turning from asphalt to gravel to dirt. Delia had the lawyer's directions written out on the back of an old utility bill, and even so she got lost twice, doubling back down lanes that ended in pastures, asking directions from a man on a tractor who pointed without speaking, until at last the road climbed a long shallow rise through a stand of old oaks, and the house came into view. She stopped the car. She did not mean to, but her foot came off the gas on its own, and the engine idled and shuddered, and she sat there looking at it through the windshield while Posy unbuckled her seatbelt and pressed her face to the glass. It was enormous. That was the first thing, the thing that made no sense against the number $250. It was a great gaunt house of dark stone and weathered wood, 3 full stories with a tower at one corner and a wide sagging porch wrapping the front, and it stood alone on its rise with the forest pressing close behind it and a tangle of dead garden in front, the whole thing gone gray and green with neglect, ivy swallowing the lower walls. Half the windows boarded and the other half black and empty as the eyes of the plains in a story Delia would never read. It was the kind of house that children dared each other to approach. It was the kind of house that featured in the dreams you were glad to wake from. And it was, the lawyer's letter had assured her, structurally sound, the roof intact, the foundation solid. The only reason its tax value was so low being its age, its remoteness, its 11 years of sealed abandonment, and the fact that no one within 100 miles had the money or the madness to want such a place. "Is that our house?" Posy whispered. "I think so," Delia said. "It's a castle. It's a wreck, baby. It's a castle," Posy insisted, and there was no fear in her voice, only wonder, and Delia felt something tighten in her chest, because that was the gift of being 6, to look at a ruin and see a castle, and she did not know how much longer her daughter would be able to do that, how many more disappointments it would take before the wonder wore through. They drove the last 100 yards and parked in front of the porch. The lawyer had said the key would be under a particular stone by the back door, left there by his office after the taxes were settled, and Delia found it after a few minutes of searching, a heavy old iron thing green with age, and she stood at the back door with it in her hand and felt suddenly, absurdly, that she was about to commit some kind of trespass, that the house did not want her, that she should knock first. She did not knock. She fit the key into the lock, and it resisted, and she had to lean her shoulder into the door and turn with both hands. And at last the bolt drew back with a sound like a bone settling, and the door swung inward into darkness, and the smell of 11 years of stillness, dust, and old wood, and something faintly sweet underneath, like the ghost of flowers long dead. "Stay close to me," Delia said, and Posy took her hand, and they went in. The interior was a shock after the ruin of the exterior, because inside, beneath the dust, the house was whole. The 11 years of sealing had preserved it like a held breath. There was furniture under white sheets, and the sheets had grayed but not rotted, and when Delia pulled one back a beautiful old armchair stood beneath it, the upholstery faded but intact. There were rugs on the floors, thick with dust but unmarred. There were paintings on the walls, landscapes and portraits gone dim under their grime, and a great staircase rising from the front hall with a banister of dark carved wood, and high ceilings with plaster moldings, and chandeliers furred with cobwebs. It was not a wreck inside. It was a museum, a house that someone had loved and furnished and lived in, and then simply closed up and walked away from, leaving everything where it stood. Delia walked through the rooms with her daughter's hand in hers, and felt the strangeness of it grow with every step. Who walks away from a house like this? Who leaves the chairs and the rugs and the paintings and locks the door for 11 years? The electricity, miraculously, still worked, or some of it did. The lawyer had arranged for the power to be restored before her arrival, and when Delia found a switch and flicked it, a single bulb came to life in the kitchen, dim and orange, and the relief of that small light was so sharp it brought tears to her eyes. There was running water too, brown and sputtering at first, and then clearing, and a great cast-iron stove that she did not yet know how to work, and cabinets full of old dishes and a pantry with shelves that still held jars of preserves gone dark and sinister with age. It was a house you could live in. It was a house you could make a home in, with work, with time, and Delia stood in the kitchen under the orange light with her exhausted daughter leaning against her leg and thought that maybe, against all the evidence of her life so far, something had finally broken her way. She did not let herself believe it. She had learned long ago that believing was the thing that hurt you. But she let herself, just for a moment, stop bracing. That first night they slept in the largest of the bedrooms. On a mattress Delia beat the dust out of with a broom until the air was thick with it, and they both coughed, and she spread their own blankets from the car over the old sheets and lay down with Posy and listened to the house. Old houses are never silent. They tick and settle and breathe, the wood expanding and contracting, the wind finding its way through gaps, the pipes knocking. Delia lay awake a long time learning the house's sounds, the way she had learned the sounds of the rest stop, the way she had learned the sounds of every place she had ever had to sleep without trusting it. And somewhere in the small hours, just as she was finally drifting, Posy spoke in the dark, her voice clear and certain in the way of a child half in dream. "There's somebody else here, Mommy." Delia came fully awake at once, her heart slamming. What? What do you mean?" "In the house," Posy murmured. "Walking around. Down low." Delia lay rigid, listening, and heard nothing but the wind and the wood and the pipes. "It's just the house, baby," she said. "Old houses make noises. Go back to sleep." But Posy was already asleep, and Delia was not, and she lay there until the gray of dawn came up in the windows, listening to a house that, she told herself, was only settling. Morning made the fear seem foolish, as morning always does. The light came up clean and the rain had finally stopped, and Delia made coffee on the old stove after a half hour of trial and error, and she and Posy ate the last of the bread and peanut butter they had brought from the apartment, sitting at a great oak table in the kitchen that could have seated 12. In daylight the house was less a haunted thing and more a project, an immense, overwhelming project, but a project, something to do, something to fix, and Delia had always been better when she had something to fix. She made lists in her head. The windows that were boarded would need light. The gutters were full. The garden was dead, but the soil under it might not be. There was a town with a hardware store and a diner, which meant there were people, which meant there might be work, and work meant money, and money meant they could eat past the end of the week. She had $11 in her wallet and a quarter tank of gas and a house she could not sell for a year, and somehow, in the morning light, in the great warm kitchen, it felt like more than she had had in a long time. While Delia scrubbed and assessed, and made her lists, Posy explored. This was the thing about the house that Delia would come to understand only later, that it was built for a child's exploration, full of doors and passages and rooms that opened into other rooms, closets deep enough to hide in, a back staircase narrow and dark that the servants must once have used, window seats and alcoves, and a tower with a spiral stair that Delia forbade her daughter from climbing until she had checked it herself. Posy went through the house the way water goes through a sponge, finding every opening, and Delia led her, calling out warnings, keeping half an ear on the small footsteps overhead, glad to hear in them a lightness that had not been there in months. They had spent the last year in a one-bedroom apartment with a landlord who pounded on the ceiling if Posy ran. Here she could run. Here she could be 6. It was on the third day that Posy found the mirror. The house had many mirrors, great dim silvered things in heavy frames, hung in the hallways and over the mantels and in the bedrooms, all of them clouded with age so that you looked into them as into deep water and saw yourself as a pale wavering ghost. But there was one in particular, on the second floor at the end of a long hall, in a room that had clearly been Eleanor Vance's own bedroom, the grandest of the rooms, with a four-poster bed and a writing desk by the window and a wardrobe of carved blackwood. The mirror in that room was the largest in the house, taller than a man, set into the wall itself rather than hung upon it, framed in dark wood carved with leaves and birds and small strange faces, and it filled the whole of one wall between the wardrobe and the corner. Delia had noticed it on her first walk through, had caught her own startled reflection in it, and felt a small irrational chill, and had moved on. Posy noticed it too, but Posy, being 6, did not move on. Posy stood in front of it and made faces at her dim reflection and pressed her hands against the cold glass. And it was while she was pressing her hands against the glass that she felt it move. "Mommy!" Her voice came down the stairs and through the house with the particular pitch that snapped Delia instantly from whatever she was doing. "Mommy, come here, come here." The mirror moved. Delia was in the kitchen, elbow deep in a sink full of old dishes, and she dried her hands on her jeans and went up the stairs taking them two at a time, because a 6-year-old's voice can mean anything, can mean delight or terror or a splinter or a broken bone, and a mother learns to run first and ask after. She found Posy in Eleanor Vance's bedroom, standing in front of the great mirror, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Look, look," Posy said. "Push it. Push the corner." "What do you mean it moved? Did you break it? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt. Push it. The corner. It moves, Mommy. It's a door." Delia knelt beside her daughter and looked at the mirror. Her own reflection knelt back, dim and doubled and strange in the clouded glass. "Mirrors aren't doors, baby. This one is. Watch." And Posy put both her small hands against the lower corner of the great frame and pushed, throwing her whole slight weight into it. And Delia was about to tell her to stop, that she would pull the whole thing down on herself, when the mirror moved. It moved. The entire towering mirror, frame and glass and all, swung inward a few inches on a hinge Delia could not see, with a low grinding sound of wood on stone, releasing a breath of cold air that smelled of earth and depth and something older than the rest of the house. And behind it, in the gap where the wall should have been, was darkness. Delia's heart stopped and then lurched forward. She pulled Posy back by the shoulder, more roughly than she meant to, and the girl protested. But Delia was already on her feet, putting herself between her daughter and the dark gap behind the mirror. "Stay back," she said. "Stay back, baby. Let me look." She got her fingers into the edge of the frame and pulled, and the mirror swung farther, wide enough now to step through, and the cold air poured out of it, and Delia stood at the threshold of it and looked into the dark and could not see the bottom. There were stairs. That was what she could make out, narrow stone stairs going down, swallowed after the first few steps by a blackness so complete it seemed to drink the light from the room. The mirror was not a mirror at all, or not only a mirror. It was a door, a hidden door, mounted on a concealed pivot, and behind it a stairway went down into the body of the house, down past where the cellar should have been, down into the rock the house was built on. "There's a stairway behind the mirror," Posy breathed, and there was no fear in her voice, only that same wonder she had brought to the ruined castle from the road. And Delia felt the hair rise on her arms, because she remembered the night before, the small certain voice in the dark. "There's somebody else here, Mommy. Walking around. Down low." "Posy," she said, kneeling again, taking her daughter by both shoulders and turning her so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me. This is very important. You are not to go down there. Not ever. Not when I'm with you and not when I'm not. Do you understand me? Those stairs are not safe. They're old and they're dark and we don't know what's down there. Promise me." Posy's face fell at the seriousness of it, but she nodded. "I promise." "Say it. Say I promise I won't go down the stairs." "I promise I won't go down the stairs." "Good girl." Delia stood and looked again at the dark gap, and the cold came out of it and touched her face, and she thought, with the part of her mind that had spent 29 years learning to expect the worst, that nothing good waited at the bottom of a stairway someone had hidden behind a mirror and sealed inside a wall. People did not hide things they were proud of. People did not seal up beauty. The house had been closed for 11 years, and here, behind the grandest mirror in the grandest room, was a deeper closing, a secret within the secret, and Delia's whole life had taught her that secrets were debts waiting to come due. She pushed the mirror closed. It took both hands and all her weight, and it shut with the same grinding groan, and her own dim reflection swung back into place, and the cold air was sealed away, and the room was just a room again. But she stood looking at the mirror for a long time after, at the small carved faces in the frame, and she had the distinct and unwelcome feeling that the house had been waiting 11 years for someone to find that door, and that it had used a 6-year-old to do it, because a 6-year-old would push where an adult would only look. That night she could not sleep at all. She lay in the dark with Posy curled against her, and she listened to the house, and now she could not stop hearing the thing her daughter had heard, the suggestion of movement down low, beneath them, in the rock. She told herself it was the pipes. She told herself it was the wind in the hidden stairway, finding its way up through the gap in the frame. She told herself 100 sensible things, and she believed none of them, and somewhere past midnight she gave up on sleep and slid carefully out from under her daughter and went down to the kitchen and sat at the great oak table with a glass of brown well water and tried to think. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, he had known about the house. He had handled the estate. If anyone living knew what was down those stairs, it would be him, and even if he did not know, he would know more than she did about Eleanor Vance, about why a woman would seal up a beautiful house and walk away from it, about what kind of secret was worth hiding behind a mirror. Delia found the lawyer's letter in the glove box of the car the next morning, and there was a phone number on the letterhead, and she drove into Marrow's into the gas station where there was a payphone, because her own phone had been cut off 2 weeks before the eviction, and she fed it the last of her quarters and called. The woman who answered said Mr. Abernathy was with a client and took a message. Delia gave the house's situation, the inheritance, her name, and asked that he call her back, and then realized she had no number to leave, and stood there foolish and ashamed at the payphone until the woman, hearing something in her silence, softened and said she would have Mr. Abernathy come out to the house himself, that he had been meaning to anyway, that there were papers still to sign. He would come Thursday. It was Tuesday. Delia hung up and stood in the cold sunshine outside the gas station, and she became aware that she was being watched. There was a man pumping gas into a truck 3 pumps over, an older man, 60s maybe, weathered and lean, in a canvas coat, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not read, not hostile exactly, but intent, the way you look at something you recognize but cannot place. When he saw that she had noticed him, he did not look away, the way most people would. He finished with his gas, and he hung up the pump, and he walked over to her, slow and deliberate, and stopped a polite distance away. "You'd be the one took the Vance place," he said. "It was not a question. I inherited it," Delia said carefully. "Yes." The man nodded slowly, looking past her, up the road in the direction of the house she could not see from here. "Eleanor was my neighbor," he said. "Such as neighbors are, out here. 40 years, off and on. Then one day she up and left, and I never saw her again." He brought his eyes back to Delia. "You found anything in there yet?" It was the way he asked it. There was a weight under the words, a particular care, and Delia felt the cold of the hidden stairway touch her again even in the sunshine. "Found a lot of dust," she said. "It's a big house." "It is that." He studied her another moment. "You got a young one with you. A little girl. I seen her in the car. My daughter. You want to keep her close, out there." He said it gently, almost kindly, but the kindness did not reach the warning underneath it. "That house has got history. Not all of it good. Eleanor Vance didn't seal that place up for nothing, and she didn't leave it to a stranger 400 miles off for nothing either." He touched the brim of an imaginary hat, an old gesture from an older time. "Name's Caleb Frost. I'm up the next rise, the white house with the red barn. You need anything, you come find me. And you watch that little girl." And he turned and walked back to his truck and got in and drove away, leaving Delia standing at the payphone with her heart going hard and the last of her quarters gone, and 2 days to wait before the lawyer came, and the cold knowledge settling into her that the man had not been making conversation. He had been warning her, and he had known about the girl. And the thing that frightened her most, driving back up to the house with Posy chattering beside her about a hawk she had seen, was the phrase he had used, the same phrase, almost word for word. that her own dread had been circling for 2 days. Eleanor Vance didn't seal that place up for nothing. Wednesday passed slowly. Delia kept Posy in her sight every minute, which was not hard in the daylight. The girl happy to follow her from room to room, helping with the cleaning, dusting the lower shelves, carrying small things, narrating an endless story to herself about the castle and its queen. But Delia found her own eyes going again and again to the staircase, to the upper floor, to the room with the mirror, and twice she went up alone while Posy was occupied and stood in front of the great clouded glass and looked at her own dim, doubled reflection and did not open it. She wanted to. That was the thing she could not admit even to herself, that under the dread was a pull, a wanting. The same wanting that had made her laugh when the lawyer's letter said $250, because some animal part of her had already done the arithmetic that the front of her mind refused. A beautiful house full of preserved furniture. A woman who walked away from all of it. A secret stairway sealed behind a mirror. People did not hide their debts behind mirrors. People hid their debts in plain sight, in unpaid bills taped to the door. What people hid behind mirrors, down stairways carved into the living rock, what people sealed up and walked away from and could not bring themselves to destroy or to sell, was something else, was something more. She did not open the mirror. She was too afraid of what wanting it meant. She had spent her whole life watching what wanting did to people, and she put her hands flat against the cold glass the way her daughter had, and she felt the faint movement of the great hidden hinge, the door's readiness to swing, and she took her hands away and went back down to her daughter and her dishes and her lists. That night Posy woke screaming. Delia was out of the bed before she was fully awake, gathering the girl into her arms, and Posy was rigid and hot, and her eyes were open, but she was not seeing, caught in the place between sleep and waking where the worst dreams live. The lady, she sobbed. The lady on the stairs, Mommy. The lady was crying. She wanted me to come down. She said, come down. Come down. It's cold up here. Come down where it's warm. And Delia held her and rocked her and said, it's a dream, baby. It's only a dream. There's no lady. There's nobody here but us. And slowly the girl came back into her body and her eyes focused, and she wept the ordinary, exhausted tears of a child after a nightmare, and at last fell back asleep against her mother's chest. But Delia did not sleep. She sat up against the headboard with her daughter in her arms and watched the door of the bedroom, which she had locked, and watched the gray come up in the windows. And when at last it was morning, she made a decision. She would ask the lawyer everything. And if the lawyer's answers did not satisfy her, if the house was what her dread and her wanting both told her it was, she would do the thing she had spent her whole life being unable to afford to do. She would do the right thing, whatever the right thing turned out to be. She had inherited the house with nothing, and she would rather leave it with nothing than have it the way the man at the gas station had warned her, the way Eleanor Vance had clearly had it, sealed and silent and unable to be lived with. Mr. Abernathy arrived Thursday at noon in a clean dark sedan that looked absurd on the rutted dirt road. A small, precise man of perhaps 60 with rimless glasses and a leather folder of papers. And Delia met him on the porch and shook his dry, cool hand and offered him coffee, which he accepted, and they sat at the great oak table in the kitchen while Posy was sent to play in the front room with the door open so Delia could see her. The lawyer spread his papers and walked her through them, the deed, the transfer, the tax settlement, the 1-year restriction on sale, and Delia signed where he showed her, her signature shaky and unfamiliar to her own eyes, the signature of a woman who owned a house. And when the papers were signed and stacked and the formality of it was done, Delia folded her hands on the table and looked at the careful little man and asked the question she had driven 400 miles and lain awake 3 nights to ask. Mr. Abernathy, who was Eleanor Vance? And why did she leave this house to a stranger? The lawyer took off his rimless glasses and polished them slowly with a cloth from his pocket, which Delia would learn was the thing he did when he was deciding how much to say. He put them back on. Eleanor Vance, he said, was a client of my firm for 51 years. My father handled her affairs before me. She was, when I knew her, a woman of considerable means, though you would not have guessed it to look at her in her last years. She lived very simply, very privately. She had no children. Her husband died young, before I was born, and she never remarried, and she outlived every relative she had, save the thread that led, eventually, after a great deal of searching on my part, to you." He paused. "As to why she left it to you. She left it to you, Mrs. Hartwell, because you are blood, however distant, and because the terms of an older trust required that the property pass to blood if any could be found. But also, I think, because of something she said to me near the end. She said, and I am quoting her as nearly as I can recall, that she wanted to leave it to someone who needed a house and had never had one. Someone who would understand what it was to be given a roof. She was very specific about that. She did not want it to go to anyone comfortable." Delia's throat was tight. She knew about me, about my situation. She instructed me to find the heir and to ascertain their circumstances before the transfer. I did. I knew, before you ever received my letter, that you were about to lose your home. I confess I was glad to be able to offer you another, however strange." The lawyer hesitated, and his eyes went, just for a moment, toward the ceiling, toward the upper floor, and Delia felt the cold again. "Mrs. Hartwell, may I ask, in your time here, have you found anything unusual about the house?" And there it was, the same careful wait she had heard in the man at the gas station. Delia held the lawyer's gaze. "Why don't you tell me what you mean by unusual?" she said. "And then I'll tell you what I've found." The lawyer was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a wind moved through the dead garden, and the old house ticked and settled around them. And from the front room came the small sound of Posy talking to herself, telling her endless story. And at last Mr. Abernathy folded his hands to match Delia's own and leaned forward slightly and said, in a voice gone low and grave, "Mrs. Hartwell, there is a thing about this house that I am bound by the terms of my client's instructions to tell you, and that I have not told you until now because she instructed me to tell you only if you asked, only if you came to me with a question, because she said, and again I quote her, that if the right person had the house, they would ask, and if the wrong person had it, they would only take. You have asked, so I will tell you. Eleanor Vance did not seal this house because of grief or madness, or because she could no longer bear to live alone, though those were the things she let the town believe. She sealed it because of what is underneath it. And I think, from your face, that you have already found the way down." Delia's hands had gone cold around her coffee cup. "There's a stairway," she said, "behind a mirror. My daughter found it. I haven't opened it. I haven't gone down." She swallowed. "What's down there, Mr. Abernathy?" And the lawyer drew a breath, and glanced once more toward the front room where the child played, and lowered his voice still further, so that Delia had to lean in to hear, and he told her. "I do not know," he said, "the whole of it. I want to be honest with you about that, because you will be tempted, when I am done, to believe that I know more than I do, and I do not. What I know is this. Eleanor Vance's husband, Thomas, was a man who came into a great deal of money in a way that Eleanor never spoke of plainly, and that I have never been able to fully trace. This was before my time, before my father's time even. The money was old when I first handled the accounts. There were trusts and holdings and instruments I administered for 50 years without ever seeing the source of them. And I asked, once, early on, when I was young and foolish enough to ask, and Eleanor told me that the source was none of my concern, and that my concern was only to keep it safe and to keep it quiet, and that as long as I did those two things I would be well paid. And I was. I am ashamed to tell you how well." He looked down at his folded hands. "There came a time, about 11 years ago, when something changed. Eleanor called me to the house. She was an old woman by then, frail, but her mind was iron to the very end. She told me that she had decided to seal the house and leave it, and that I was to settle the taxes from the estate in perpetuity so that it would never be lost for non-payment, and that I was to find the blood heir when she died and pass it on with the conditions you now know. And she took me, that day, up to her bedroom, and she showed me the mirror, and she opened it the way your daughter opened it, and she made me look down the stairs. She did not make me go down. She said no one should go down who did not have to. But she told me what was at the bottom. And then she sealed it, and we never spoke of it again. And 3 weeks later she left the house for the last time, and she lived her last years in a small, rented room in a town 60 miles from here. A woman who could have bought the town outright, and she died there, alone, by her own choosing. And the last thing she said to me, the very last, was that she hoped whoever got the house would have the strength to do what she could not. "What's at the bottom?" Delia said. Her voice did not sound like her own. "At the bottom of the stairs," the lawyer said, "there is a door, an iron door, set into the rock. And behind the door there is a room. And in the room, Mrs. Hartwell, there is a vault. Eleanor opened it for me, that one time. I will tell you what I saw, and you may believe me or not. But I have carried it for 11 years and I am glad, God help me, to set it down at last. There was gold. Gold in bars, stacked like firewood, more than I could count, more than I could have imagined existing in one place. There were cases of paper, certificates, bonds, things I recognized the form of but could not value at a glance. There were boxes, dozens of them, that she did not open and that I did not ask her to. And there was art, paintings, wrapped and crated, leaned against the walls in their dozens, and she told me that some of them were things the world believed lost, things that had vanished from museums and collections across a century, and that her husband had not bought them honestly, and that she had not been able to bring herself to give them back and had not been able to bring herself to keep enjoying them either. And so she had sealed them up in the dark and walked away and tried to live the rest of her life, as if the money under the house did not exist. He took off his glasses again, and this time he did not polish them, only held them in his hand, and his eyes without them looked old and tired and afraid. I had a single appraiser, a man I trusted absolutely, value what little Eleanor permitted me to document for the estate under the strictest confidence. He would not put a final number on it. He said the gold alone, at present prices, would run into the hundreds of millions. He said that if the art was what Eleanor claimed, the total was beyond his competence to estimate. The figure he was willing to commit to paper, as a floor, as the very least it could be, was $440 million. The kitchen was utterly silent. Even the wind had stopped. From the front room, Posy's small voice had gone quiet too, the child fallen into the deep absorption of play, and Delia sat very still and did not breathe and felt the numbers sink through her like the cold air had poured out of the stairway, all the way down, into the rock the house was built on. $440 million. Under her house. Behind the mirror her daughter had pushed open with two small hands. The house valued at $250 for the taxes, the house no one wanted, the house given to the woman who needed a roof and had never had one. And beneath it, in the dark, sealed by a frail old woman who could not live with it and could not destroy it, a fortune past the edge of comprehension. Why? Delia managed at last. Why give it to me? Why not give it away? Why not give it back, if it was stolen, if it wasn't honest? Why hand it to a stranger 400 miles off and tell her about the roof and the strength? Because she could not decide, the lawyer said simply. That is the truth of it, Mrs. Hartwell, and it is not a flattering truth about my client, whom I loved in my way. She could not decide what was right, and so she made it someone else's decision, someone who, she hoped, would be the kind of person who could see clearly what she could not. She gave it to blood because the trust required blood, but she gave it to poor blood, to needful blood, to you, because she said, near the end, that only someone who knew what it was to have nothing could understand what that much was, and what it would cost, and what it was for. She said a comfortable person would simply take it and be ruined by it. She said a desperate person might, just might, understand that it was not a gift but a test. He put his glasses back on, and the careful, precise lawyer settled back over the frightened old man like a coat. I have told you everything I know. The money is yours, legally, free and clear, with the title and the deed you have just signed. There is no one to stop you opening that vault and spending the last of your days in any luxury the world can offer. The art that was stolen so long ago that proving it now would be the work of a lifetime, and many of the people it was taken from are dead, and the institutions are insured, and no one is looking, and no one would know. You could take it all. Eleanor knew that. She counted on you knowing it too. He gathered his papers and squared them and stood and looked down at her where she sat frozen at the great oak table. But she also hoped you might be the one to do what she could not. She did not tell me what that was. I do not think she knew herself. I think she only hoped that the right person, given the choice, would find it. I am sorry to have laid this on you. I will tell you one more thing, and then I will go. The man you may have met, Caleb Frost, the neighbor. He has watched this house for 11 years. He does not know what is in it, not the particulars, but he knows there is something, because Eleanor told him, near the end, to keep an eye on the place and on whoever came to it, and to warn them. She paid him nothing. He does it out of fondness for her memory and, I suspect, out of fear. If you need someone in this county you can trust, it is him. Now I will go. Keep your daughter away from those stairs. And Mrs. Hartwell. He paused at the kitchen door. Whatever you decide, decide it as the person you want your daughter to remember you as. That is the only counsel I have. It is the only counsel that has ever been worth anything. And he went out, and Delia heard the absurd clean sedan start and turn and pick its way back down the rutted road. And she sat at the table for a long time while the afternoon light moved across the floor, and her daughter played in the next room, and $440 million waited in the dark beneath them, behind a mirror, at the bottom of a stairway, sealed 11 years and now, because of two small hands, no longer sealed at all. She thought of the $11 in her wallet, which were now 7, because she had bought bread and milk in town. She thought of the rest stop parking lot, and the coats spread over both of them like a thin shared blanket. She thought of the landlord who pounded on the ceiling and the sheriff who was not cruel about it, only tired, and the relatives who had stopped answering, and her mother dead at 51 with nothing but debt and stubbornness to leave behind. She thought of every closed door of her life, every no, every not enough, every humiliation swallowed at a market stall or a payphone or an unemployment office. And she thought of the gold stacked like firewood in the dark, the paper, the boxes Eleanor had not opened, the paintings the world believed lost. She thought it could all be over. The fear, the not enough. Posy could have everything. Posy could have the things Delia had watched other children have through windows and across playgrounds her whole life. The things she had promised herself her own child would have and had failed, again and again, to provide. It could all be over, tonight, with a single descent into the dark. And she thought of the lawyer's last words, and of the man at the gas station who had said watch that little girl, and of Eleanor Vance dying alone in a rented room 60 miles away, a woman who could have bought the town and chose instead to die with nothing rather than die with that. And Delia understood, sitting at the table in the failing light, that the old woman had been right about one thing at least. It was not a gift. It was a test. And Delia did not yet know if she would pass it. She did not know what passing it even meant. She knew only that she was going to have to go down those stairs, with her own eyes, and see the thing she had inherited, before she could decide what to do with it, and that she was more afraid of that descent than she had been of the sheriff or the eviction or the rest stop dark, because she did not know, truly did not know, what kind of person would come back up. She made dinner. She put her daughter to bed in the locked room and lay beside her until the child slept. And then she rose in the dark and took the heavy old flashlight she had found in the kitchen, the one that threw a weak yellow beam. And she stood for a moment looking down at Posy's sleeping face, at the dark lashes and the parted lips and the small hand curled on the pillow, the hand that had pushed open the mirror, the hand that had, without knowing it, opened the whole of their lives onto a choice Delia had never imagined having to make. And then she went out, and she locked the bedroom door behind her so that her daughter could not follow. And she walked down the long dark hall to the grandest room in the house, to the great clouded mirror in its frame of carved leaves and birds and small strange faces. And she set her hands against the lower corner the way her daughter had, and she pushed. The mirror swung inward with its low grinding groan, and the cold air poured out of the dark, smelling of earth and depth, and the breath of something sealed 11 years, and the narrow stone stairs went down before her into a blackness her weak yellow beam could not reach the bottom of. Delia Hartwell stood at the threshold with her heart slamming against her ribs and $440 million waiting in the dark below, and behind her, locked safe in a room down the hall, her sleeping daughter, and everything that the next hour held, every dollar and every choice and every cost, waited for her at the bottom of the stairs. She took the first step down. The cold closed over her. The stairway took her, one step at a time, down into the rock, toward the iron door, and the dark swallowed the small yellow light. And what she found at the bottom would change everything, every single thing, that came after. The stairs were colder than she expected, and steeper, and they did not turn the way ordinary stairs turned, but went down in a long straight plunge into the rock, each step worn shallow in the middle as if many feet had used them over many years, which made no sense to Delia, because Eleanor had said no one should go down who did not have to. She counted them as she went, because counting was something to hold on to, the way she had counted the trucks at the rest stop, the way she had counted the dollars in her wallet. 12 steps. 20. 30. The weak yellow beam of the flashlight reached out ahead of her and found only more stairs, more rough-cut stone walls glistening faintly with damp, and the cold came up from below to meet the cold that poured down from the open mirror behind her. And somewhere around the 40th step she stopped counting, because she had begun to be afraid that the stairs would never end, that they went down forever, that the house had been built over a hole in the world. But they ended. At the bottom there was a small flat landing, perhaps 4 feet square, and the air was different there, very still, very cold, the air of a place that had been closed a long time. And the flashlight found the iron door the lawyer had described, set into the rock and banded with heavy straps gone orange with rust, and in the center of it a great lock, and below the lock a handle. Delia stood on the landing and looked at the door and listened, and there was no sound at all now, not the wind, not the pipes, not the ticking of the old house, nothing but her own breath and her own heart, and she understood that the house was above her now, that she had come down beneath even the cellar, into the bones of the hill, and that whatever was behind the iron door had been here in this silence and this cold for longer than she had been alive. The door was not locked. That was the thing that made her hands shake. Eleanor had opened it for the lawyer 11 years ago and had not, it seemed, locked it again, or the lock had failed, or the key had been lost, and when Delia put her hand on the cold handle and pulled, the door resisted only with the weight of itself and the stiffness of its hinges, and then it swung open, grinding, into deeper dark, and the air that came out of the room beyond was the oldest air Delia had ever breathed, dry and dead and faintly metallic, and she lifted the flashlight and stepped through, and she saw it. The beam was weak, and the room was large, larger than the kitchen above, larger than any room in the house, a chamber cut into the rock with a low-arched ceiling, and the flashlight could not light all of it at once, so that Delia had to sweep the beam slowly across the dark, and the dark gave up its contents to her a piece at a time, the way the lake had given up the gold horse to the fisherman, the way the cargo hold had given up its crates to the homeless girl, slowly, impossibly, more than the mind could hold. The gold first. The lawyer had said stacked like firewood, and he had not been speaking in metaphor. Against the far wall the gold bars were stacked in courses like a mason's work, a low long wall of them, dull yellow in the weak beam, and Delia's mind simply refused them, refused to count, refused to total, slid off the sight of them the way her hand had slid off the cold glass of the mirror. Then the cases of paper, wooden crates with their lids pried up and the certificates inside furred with dust, and the boxes the lawyer had not opened, dozens of them, stacked and shelved, and against the long wall, leaned in their crating, wrapped in canvas and oilcloth gone stiff with age, the paintings, rank on rank of them, more than she could count, the lost art of a century sealed in the dark beneath a house worth $250. Delia sank down onto the cold stone floor of the vault with the flashlight in her lap, throwing its small light up at the low-arched ceiling, and she put her face in her hands, and she did not weep, though she had thought she might. She felt instead a vast and terrible stillness, the stillness of a person standing at the exact center of their own life, with every road leading away in every direction at once. $440 million, at the least, in the dark around her. The end of fear. The end of not enough. Everything she had ever wanted for her daughter, every door that had ever closed, every no, all of it undone in an instant, here, now. Hers, legally hers, the deed signed at the great oak table that very afternoon. She had only to begin. She had only to carry it up, a bar at a time, a box at a time, to find a man like the jeweler in the story she would never read who bought things without paperwork, to begin the long quiet work of turning the dark beneath the house into a life in the light, and no one would stop her, and no one would know, and Posy would never sleep in a rest stop parking lot again, would never wear shoes held together with tape, would never watch her mother count out coins at a payphone, would never know what it was to be the child the landlord pounded the ceiling at. Delia sat in the dark with the fortune of a small nation around her and understood, fully and for the first time, why Eleanor Vance had not been able to decide. Because there was no clean answer. Because the wanting was not weakness or greed. The wanting was love. The wanting was a mother's whole heart. And against a mother's whole heart, what was an old theft? What were museums and insurance and dead collectors and a fortune so old its source could no longer even be traced? She did not know how long she sat there. Long enough that the flashlight's weak beam grew weaker, yellowing toward orange, and the cold worked its way through her clothes and into her. And at last the fear of the failing light got her to her feet, because the one thing she could not bear, the one thing worse than any choice, was the thought of being trapped in the dark down here, beneath the rock, with the gold and the lost paintings and the boxes Eleanor had not opened. She swept the beam one last time across the room, and as she did, it caught something she had not seen, on a small table near the iron door, set apart from the gold and the art as if it did not belong with them, as if it were a different kind of thing. A box. A small wooden box, plain, unvarnished, the kind a person might keep letters in, and on top of it, weighted down by a smooth gray stone, a folded paper gone soft and gray with age. Delia crossed to it. She lifted the stone. She unfolded the paper, and in a hand that shook with cold and something else, she read, by the dying yellow light, the last words of Eleanor Vance. If you are reading this, the letter began, then you are blood, and you are poor, because I instructed that fool of a kind lawyer to give it only to blood, and only to the poor, and you have done what I could not stop you from doing, and what I half hoped you would do. You have come down the stairs. I am dead, or you would not be here. Do not pity me. I lived 89 years, and most of them were comfortable, and some of them were even happy, and I did almost nothing with any of it that I am proud of. And that is the truth. I have carried down these stairs more times than I can count, in the dark, alone, to sit where you are sitting now and look at what my husband stole and I kept. He was a charming man and a thief, and I knew it when I married him, and I told myself I did not. And when he died, I told myself the money was clean now, that death had washed it, that a widow could not be expected to unravel what a husband had wound. I told myself that for 40 years. I am telling you the truth now, because the dead can afford the truth, and because I want one living person to know it before I go. It is not clean. It was never clean. Some of what is in this room was taken from people who are dead now, and some from people whose grandchildren are alive and do not know what was taken from them, and some from places that called themselves museums and were only the collections of other thieves, so that giving it back is not even simple, even if you wanted to, even if you were better than I was, which I hope you are, which is the only hope I have left. I could not decide. I want you to understand that I am not leaving you this because I want you to keep it. I am also not leaving it to you because I want you to give it away. I am leaving it to you because I could not bear to make the choice, and I am too much of a coward to make it from the grave by tying your hands. The choice is yours. It is truly yours. I have set you free to make it, which is the cruelest gift I have, and the only honest one. In this box are the papers that show, as far as I was ever able to learn, where some of it came from. I gathered them over 40 years in secret, a little at a time, half hoping to act, and never acting. Use them or burn them. Take the gold or leave it. Be better than me or be exactly as weak as I was. You have my blood. You may not be able to help it. But know this, whoever you are. I died in a rented room with nothing because I could not live in this house with that under it. And at the end the nothing was lighter than the everything had ever been. That is all I know. That is all 40 years taught me. I am sorry to leave it to you. I am not sorry to leave it to someone at last. Eleanor. Delia stood in the cold dark holding the letter, and the flashlight died. It did not flicker and fade. It simply went out, all at once, and the dark came down over her complete and absolute. The dark of 40 feet of rock, the dark of a room sealed 11 years, and Delia's heart leapt into her throat, and for one wild moment, she nearly screamed, nearly ran blind for where she thought the door was, and the stairs beyond, and she made herself stop. She made herself stand still. She made herself breathe. She put the letter into her pocket with the hand that was not gripping the dead flashlight. and she reached out into the black until her fingers found the cold edge of the small table. And from the table she found the wall, and along the wall, one hand trailing the cold rough stone, she felt her way to the iron door, which she had left open. Thank God, and threw it to the landing and the foot of the stairs, and she went up. She went up in the absolute dark, one hand on the wall and one foot finding each worn step. Counting now again because counting was the rope she climbed. 12, 20, 30, 40, and at last there was a paleness ahead of her, the faint gray of the open mirror against the deeper black, and she came up out of the rock into the grandest room of the house and the ordinary blessed dark of an ordinary night. Moonlight in the windows, the wind in the dead garden, the old house ticking and settling around her, and she pushed the mirror shut behind her with both hands and leaned her back against the cold glass and slid down it to the floor and sat there shaking until the gray of dawn came up in the windows. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. She did not go back to bed. She sat on the floor of Eleanor's bedroom with her back against the closed mirror until the light came. And then she rose and unlocked the door of the room where Posy slept and stood looking at her daughter, who had not stirred, who slept the deep, clean sleep of a child who trusts the person guarding the door. And Delia thought about the letter in her pocket and the box she had left on the small table in the dark. The box of papers Eleanor had gathered over 40 years in secret, half hoping to act and never acting. And she understood that the old woman had not been a villain and had not been a hero, that she had been exactly what Delia was afraid of being, a person who could not decide, who let the not deciding become the deciding, who carried a thing for 40 years rather than face it, and who died with nothing not out of nobility, but because the everything had finally grown too heavy to hold. Delia made coffee. She woke Posy gently and made her breakfast, the last of the eggs, and she watched her daughter eat and chatter about the dream she'd had, a good dream this time, about a horse. And Delia held herself together through all of it, the smiling, the listening, the ordinary morning, while underneath it her mind went around and around the choice the way water goes around a drain. And when breakfast was done and Posy had gone off to play in the front room with the door open, Delia did the thing she had been circling toward since the flashlight died in the dark. She got into the car, and she drove to the White House with the red barn on the next rise, and she knocked on Caleb Frost's door, because Mr. Abernathy had said if you need someone in this county you can trust, it is him. And Delia Hartwell, who had trusted almost no one in her life and had been right not to, needed, for the first time she could remember, to trust someone. Caleb Frost opened the door in his stocking feet, with a cup of coffee in his hand and a look on his weathered face that said he had been expecting her, maybe not today, maybe not this hour, but expecting her all the same. The way you expect whether you can feel coming in your joints. He looked at her standing on his porch in yesterday's clothes with her eyes red from a night without sleep, and he stepped back and held the door and said, "You'd better come in. I'll put on more coffee. You look like a woman who's been down the stairs." She stopped on the threshold. "How do you?" "I don't," he said. "Not the particulars. Eleanor never told me the particulars. But I've watched that house 11 years, and I know the look of somebody it's gotten a hold of. She had it. The lawyer's got a touch of it every time he comes out. And now you've got it. The look of somebody carrying a weight they can't set down and can't pick all the way up. Come in. Sit. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But I expect you came up here to tell somebody, or you wouldn't have come at all." And Delia came in and sat at his kitchen table, which was small and clean and ordinary and had a vase of dried flowers on it, and a window that looked out over a tidy yard and a chicken run, the most ordinary kitchen in the world. And Caleb Frost put coffee in front of her and sat down across from her and waited, the way the lawyer had waited, the way good people wait, without pushing. And Delia told him. Not all of it. Not the number. She could not say the number out loud. It was too large. It would have changed the air in the small, clean kitchen. But she told him there was a vault under the house, and that it held a fortune, and that some of it was stolen, old stolen so long ago the trail was cold, and that Eleanor had left her a letter and a box of papers and the choice of what to do. and that she had spent the night sitting on a stone floor in the dark, understanding for the first time why a woman would die alone in a rented room rather than live with money under her bed. Caleb Frost listened to all of it without speaking, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands, and when she was done he was quiet a long while, looking out the window at his chickens, and then he said, "Eleanor Vance was the best neighbor I ever had, and one of the unhappiest people I ever knew. And for a long time I couldn't square those two things, how a woman could be so good to everybody around her and so miserable inside her own skin. After she sealed the place up and left, I figured it out. It wasn't a mystery. It was the money. The money was the misery. She gave away more in this county, quiet, no name on it, than anybody'll ever know, paid for roofs and operations and funerals, and never once let on it was her. And it didn't help her, not a bit, because she knew where it came from, and you can't wash a thing clean by spending it on good. She tried for 40 years. It can't be done. That's what she learned, and that's what near killed her, and that's, I expect, what she's handed you." He set down his cup. "Now, you came up here for something. People don't drive over at 7 in the morning on no sleep to tell a story. What is it you came for?" Delia looked at the dried flowers in the vase. "I came," she said slowly, "because I don't trust myself. Because I sat down there in the dark and I wanted it, Mr. Frost. I wanted it so bad I could taste it. Not for me. For my girl. I've got $7 in my wallet and a daughter who's slept in a parking lot, and there's enough down there to give her everything I ever failed to give her. And it's mine. It's legally mine. And the people it was stolen from are dead or don't know, and nobody's looking and nobody would ever find out. And I sat there and I did the arithmetic. God help me. I did the arithmetic in my head while my daughter slept upstairs, and I scared myself. Because I could feel myself becoming the kind of person who'd do it. And I came up here because Mr. Abernathy said you were somebody I could trust, and I needed to say it out loud to somebody who'd tell me the truth. Am I a monster? For wanting it? For doing the arithmetic?" And Caleb Frost looked at her for a long moment with his weathered, kind, hard face, and then he did something she did not expect. He smiled, a small, sad smile, and shook his head. "No," he said, "you're not a monster. A monster wouldn't have done the arithmetic and got scared. A monster would have done the arithmetic and got happy. You getting scared, you driving up here on no sleep to say it out loud to somebody. That's not the monster in you. That's the other thing. That's the thing Eleanor was hoping she'd find when she went looking for poor blood. The wanting's not the sin. Everybody wants. The wanting's just being alive and being a mother. What you do with the wanting, that's the only part that's yours to answer for." He stood and refilled her coffee. "You want my counsel? I'll give it to you, for whatever an old chicken farmer's counsel is worth. But I'll warn you first, it's not the easy answer, and it's going to cost you, and I'm not the one who has to pay it, so you take it with that in mind." "Tell me," Delia said. "You read those papers Eleanor left, the ones in the box. You find out where it came from, as much as can be found out. And then you give back what can be given back, to who it can be given back to, and you do it in the daylight, with your name on it, the way Eleanor never could. And whatever's left, whatever can't be traced, whatever the law and the right of it says is truly yours to keep, that you keep, with a clean heart, for your girl. You don't have to give away the whole of it to be clean. Eleanor's mistake wasn't keeping it. Eleanor's mistake was hiding. You bring it into the light. You give back what's owed. You keep what's clean, and you'll never sit in the dark on a stone floor doing arithmetic and scaring yourself. Again, that's the only way I ever heard of to wash money, and it's not by spending it, and it's not by giving every cent away till you're a martyr in a rented room. It's by being able to say where every dollar came from and how every dollar got clean." He sat back down. "But I told you it'd cost you. Here's the cost. The minute you bring it into the light, you're not the only one who knows anymore. Eleanor kept it dark 11 years because dark is safe. Light is dangerous. There's people in this world that money calls to the way blood calls a shark, and the second word gets out that there's a fortune under that house and a young woman alone up there with a little girl deciding what to do with it. Those people are going to come. And some of them will wear suits and call themselves your friend, and some of them won't bother. So before you choose the light, you'd best understand you're choosing the danger too. Eleanor chose the dark to be safe. You'd be choosing the opposite. I won't tell you it's not frightening. I'll only tell you it's the only way I know that ends with you able to look your girl in the eye. Delia sat with that a long time in the clean, ordinary kitchen with the chickens scratching in the yard outside. And she thought about Eleanor in the rented room, and the gold stacked like firewood, and the $7 in her wallet, and the small hand that had pushed open the mirror. And she thought about the lawyer's last words at the kitchen door. Decided as the person you want your daughter to remember you as, and slowly, like the dawn coming up in the windows, she felt the choice settle in her, not as a relief, because it was not a relief, it was the harder road and she knew it, but as a kind of solid ground under her feet that she had not stood on in a very long time. "All right," she said. "All right. I'll read the papers. I'll find out where it came from, and I'll bring it into the light." She looked up at him. "But I don't know how to do any of that, Mr. Frost. I don't know lawyers or museums or how you give back a stolen painting. I clean houses. I waited tables. I've got a high school diploma and $7. How does a person like me do a thing like that?" "Same way a person does anything too big for them," Caleb Frost said. "One piece at a time, and not alone. You've got the lawyer. He's a coward, but he's an honest coward. And an honest coward will help you do the right thing as long as somebody braver makes him. You've got me, for what an old man and a truck are worth. And you've got the papers Eleanor spent 40 years too scared to use. You start with the papers. You find one thing in there you can trace, one painting, one name, one family, and you give that one thing back, in the daylight, with your name on it, and you'll find the second thing is easier than the first, and the third easier than the second. That's all a hard road ever is. The first step's the whole of it. After that you're just walking." He stood. "Now go home to your girl. She'll be wondering. And bring me that box of papers when you're ready. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. And I've got nothing to do all winter but feed chickens and help a stubborn woman do an impossible thing." And for the first time since the lawyer had said the number, Delia Hartwell felt something in her chest that was not fear, and it took her a moment to recognize it, because it had been so long, and then she did. It was hope, the dangerous kind, the kind that, in the stories Eleanor would have wanted her to be the hero of, comes right before the trouble. She drove home. Posy ran out onto the sagging porch to meet her, unhurt, unbothered, full of a morning's worth of discoveries to report, and Delia caught her up and held her tight, tighter than the moment called for, and Posy squirmed and laughed, and said, "Mommy, you're squishing me." And Delia laughed too, and set her down, and let the ordinary day take them both back, the cleaning and the lists and the slow making of a home. And she did not go up to the room with the mirror, and she did not go down the stairs, because she had decided, and the deciding had bought her, at least for a little while, the gift of being able to leave it sealed in the dark where it could not reach up and pull her down into the arithmetic again. That afternoon she went down once more, with a fresh flashlight bought in town, and a second one for backup, because she had learned her lesson about the dark, and she did not look at the gold, and she did not look at the paintings. She went straight to the small table by the iron door, and took the plain wooden box of papers Eleanor had gathered over 40 years, and she carried it up out of the rock and into the light. And that, though she did not know it yet, was the moment the danger began. Because a thing brought into the light casts a shadow, and shadows are seen. For 3 days nothing happened, and Delia and Posy lived almost like an ordinary family in the great gaunt house. And in the evenings after Posy was asleep, Delia sat at the kitchen table under the single orange bulb and went through Eleanor's box, paper by paper, in the careful hand of a woman who had taught herself, over 40 years, the patient secret work of tracing stolen things. It was not organized the way Delia would have organized it. It was organized the way grief organizes things, in fits and clusters, a dozen pages on one painting, and then nothing, a name circled 3 times and underlined, and then abandoned, letters Eleanor had drafted to museums and to families and never sent, the drafts growing shorter and more hopeless over the years until the last ones were only a line or 2. "I am writing to tell you that I have something of yours. I am writing to confess." And then nothing, the sentence never finished, the letter never sent, the painting never returned. And Delia, reading by the orange light, came to know Eleanor Vance better than she knew almost anyone living, came to feel the old woman's cowardice and her conscience locked in their 40-year war across the pages, and came to understand that the box itself was the most honest thing Eleanor had ever made, a record not of crimes, but of a soul's failure to act on what it knew. and that Eleanor had left it to her not as a tool, but as a warning. A map of exactly the swamp Delia would drown in if she let the deciding become the not deciding the way Eleanor had. She found, on the third night, the thing Caleb had told her to look for. One thing she could trace. A small painting, described in Eleanor's hand as the girl in the blue dress, no bigger than a book, and with it a yellowed clipping from a newspaper 60 years old, and a name, and a city, and a story. The painting had been taken from a family during a war, the way so many things had been taken during so many wars, and the family had survived, some of them, and had spent 2 generations looking for the things that had been taken, and Eleanor had known this, had clipped the article, had circled the family name, had drafted a letter, had never sent it. And there was more. There was a recent printout, only a few years old, that Eleanor must have asked the lawyer to obtain for her, showing that the family still existed, that there were grandchildren, that one of them had given an interview about the lost things, about how it was never about the money. It was about the proof that the people they came from had existed and had owned beautiful things and had been people, not just numbers, not just names on a list. Delia read the interview twice under the orange light with tears running down her face, and she thought, this is the first step. This is the whole of the hard road. The first painting, the girl in the blue dress, given back in the daylight to the grandchildren of the people it was stolen from, with my name on it, the way Eleanor never could. And she folded the papers carefully and put them aside, separate from the rest, the beginning of a different kind of pile. And she went to bed that night and slept, for the first time since she had come to the house, all the way through, without dreams. It was the 4th day that the man in the suit came. She heard the car first, an expensive car, low and quiet, picking its way up the rutted road with a delicacy that the lawyer's clean sedan had not managed, and she went out onto the porch with Posy held close against her leg and watched it come, a long dark car with tinted windows, and it stopped before the porch and a man got out, and Delia knew, the way Caleb had said she would know, the way blood knows a shark, that this was the danger he had warned her about, arrived sooner than she had feared, wearing a suit and a smile. He was perhaps 50, well-kept, silver at the temples, soft-handed, and he came up the path to the foot of the porch steps with his smile already in place and a leather case in one hand. And he stopped at a courteous distance and said, "Mrs. Hartwell? Delia Hartwell? I'm so sorry to arrive unannounced. My name is Garrett Vane. I represent certain interests that were associated, many years ago, with your late relative, Eleanor Vance, and with this property. I wonder if I might have a few minutes of your time. It concerns the estate. Specifically, it concerns what I believe you've recently discovered beneath this house." And Delia's blood went cold, because she had told no one the particulars. She had told Caleb there was a fortune and that some of it was stolen, and she had told the lawyer she had found the stairway, and that was all. And yet here was a stranger in a suit with her name, and Eleanor's name, and the knowledge that there was something beneath the house, arrived 4 days after she had carried the box into the light. The light had cast its shadow. The shadow had been seen. And Delia stood on the porch of the great gaunt house with her daughter pressed against her leg and the box of Eleanor's papers on the kitchen table behind her and the gold stacked like firewood in the dark below. And she looked at the smiling, soft-handed man named Garrett Vane and understood that the easy part of the choice was over, the part where the only enemy was her own wanting, and that the hard part, the dangerous part, the part Eleanor had hidden in the dark for 11 years to avoid, had just gotten out of a long dark car and started up her path with a smile and a leather case and a name that was almost, but not quite, the name of the dead. "What interests?" Delia said, and she put her hand on the back of Posy's head. "Would those be, Mr. Vane?" "May I come up?" he said, still smiling, one polished shoe already on the bottom step. "It's a delicate matter. Not, perhaps, one for the porch, or for little ears." His eyes went, just for an instant, to Posy, and the smile did not change, but something behind it did, and Delia felt every protective nerve in her body come awake at once. "I think you'll find, Mrs. Hartwell, that I'm here to make your life a great deal simpler and safer. A young woman, alone, in a remote house, with a child, and a great deal of money in a hole in the ground that a number of serious people know about and would very much like to discuss the disposition of. That's a precarious situation. I'm here to make it less precarious. I'm here, you might say, to help. Stop where you are, Delia said. Her voice did not shake. She was surprised it did not shake. You can say what you came to say from right there. And then you can get back in your car. My daughter and I were just about to have lunch. The man stopped, one foot on the bottom step, and the smile thinned slightly, and the courtesy thinned with it. And for a moment Delia saw what was underneath, the thing that had been underneath the whole time, and it was patient and cold and certain. The certainty of a man who had done this before and expected to win, who had watched fortunes change hands his whole life, and had never once been on the losing side of it. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, and his voice had gone quieter and more reasonable, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted. I'm going to be very direct with you, because I respect directness, and because I think you're an intelligent woman who's been dealt a difficult hand and is trying to play it well. There is, beneath this house, property that does not, in the fullest sense, belong to you. Oh, the deed is yours, certainly. Mr. Abernathy is a thorough man. But the contents of that vault have a history, and that history has heirs and claimants, and certain parties who have been waiting a very long time. And you, Mrs. Hartwell, have walked into the middle of something that is far, far older and far, far larger than your eviction notice and your $7. He paused, letting her hear that he knew the number, the small, humiliating number, letting her feel how thoroughly she had been looked into. I am offering you a way out, a clean exit. You sign certain documents. You accept a certain very generous consideration, more money than you have ever seen, enough to set you and your daughter up handsomely for the rest of your lives. And you walk away, and you let people who understand these things handle the disposition of what's below. You get to be safe. You get to be rich. You get to be done. And your little girl gets a mother who's alive and present and not, shall we say, complicated by the kinds of complications that fortunes like this one tend to produce. The smile came back, full and cold. Or you can choose to be difficult. And I want you to understand, before you choose, exactly what difficult costs out here. It's a long way to town, Mrs. Hartwell. The nearest sheriff's deputy is 40 minutes off on a good day. And you are, as I keep saying, alone. With a child. Now, may I please come up, and we'll talk like reasonable people, and have this all settled by supper time? Delia Hartwell stood on the porch of the house she had inherited with her $7 and her diploma and her daughter's hand warm under her own, and she looked at the smiling man on the bottom step, and she thought about Eleanor in the dark, and Caleb's warning. The second you bring it into the light, those people are going to come, and the girl in the blue dress in the separate pile on the kitchen table. The first step of the hard road she had only just decided to walk, and she understood that this was the test now. This was the real test, not the gold in the dark in her own wanting. But this, a soft-handed man with a cold smile and a leather case offering her safety and money and the chance to be done, asking only that she walk away and let people who understood these things handle the disposition of what was below. It was, she realized, the exact offer Eleanor had been unable to refuse and unable to accept for 40 years, dressed in a new suit. Take the money. Stay in the dark. Be safe. Be done. And up the road, an old man fed his chickens and waited for her to bring him a box of papers. And 400 miles south of life she had escaped, and beneath her feet, in the rock, a fortune and a choice, and on the bottom step, smiling, the danger she had chosen when she chose the light. You can't come up, Delia said. And I'm not signing anything. And I think you should go now, Mr. Vane. The smile did not waver. But the man took his foot off the step and set down his leather case on the bottom stair with great care, and straightened, and looked at her with his cold, patient certainty, and said, very softly, I'll go. Today. But I want you to think very carefully tonight, Mrs. Hartwell, about how alone you are out here, and about that little girl, and about how very, very much money is at stake, and about the fact that I am, I promise you, the most reasonable and the most generous of all the people who are going to be coming up this road in the days ahead. I'm the easy one. I'm the one who knocks. Think about that. And he picked up the case, and turned, and walked back to the long dark car without hurry, and got in, and the car picked its way back down the rutted road, and was gone, and Delia stood on the porch holding her daughter, and shaking, finally shaking, now that he could not see it, and Posy looked up at her with her clear, unfrightened eyes and said, "Mommy, who was that man?" And Delia said, "Nobody, baby. Nobody we have to worry about," and prayed that it was a lie she could make true. She did not sleep that night either, but it was a different sleeplessness than the night on the stone floor. That had been the sleeplessness of a person divided against herself. This was the sleeplessness of a person who had chosen and was afraid, but knew at least which way she was facing. She sat at the kitchen table with the doors locked and the box of Eleanor's papers in front of her and a kitchen knife within reach that she felt foolish for setting out and did not put away, and she thought it through, the way she thought through everything, in lists, in steps, in the patient arithmetic of survival that her whole hard life had taught her. Garrett Vane had given her information without meaning to. He had told her there were claimants and heirs and certain parties, which meant the contents of the vault were known, at least in part, to people in the world, which meant Eleanor's secret had never been as sealed as the old woman believed, which meant the dark had never truly been safe, only quiet. He had told her he was the easy one, the one who knocks, which meant there were others who would not knock, which meant she had days, maybe, not weeks. And he had told her, in the way he had looked at Posy, that the danger was not only to her. And that was the thing that burned away the last of her fear and replaced it with something harder and colder and more useful, because a frightened woman can be reasoned with, and a mother whose child has been threatened cannot. At first light, she put Posy in the car and drove to Caleb Frost's, and she did not knock this time. She was halfway up his porch steps when the door opened, and he took one look at her face and said, "Who came?" Not a question. And she told him, the long dark car, the soft hands, the cold smile, Garrett Vane, the offer, the threat dressed as concern, the look at Posy. "I'm the easy one. I'm the one who knocks." And Caleb Frost's weathered face went very still, and very old, and very hard. And he was quiet a moment, and then he said, "Vane. That'd be the same crew, then, or what's left of it." Thomas Vane was the husband. Eleanor took back her own family name after he died, couldn't stand to carry his, but the husband was a Vane, and the money was the Vane money, and where there's old money there's always the ones who think they should have had it, the cousins and the partners' children, the people who knew what Thomas Vane really was and helped him be it and got cut out when he died, and Eleanor sealed it all up. They've been circling 11 years, same as me, only I was circling to protect it, and they were circling to take it. This Garrett'll be a grandson, or a grandnephew, something. Carrion family. Waited for the old woman to die and the house to pass, and somebody weak enough to lean on to take possession, and here you are. He looked at Posy, sitting patient and quiet in the car, and he lowered his voice. He won't be the last. And he meant it about the little girl. People like that always mean it about the little girl, because the little girl is the lever, and they know it, and they're not above it. So here's what we do, and we do it today, because you're right, you've got days and not weeks. And he laid it out, the old chicken farmer, in his clean kitchen, with a clarity that surprised her, because he had been thinking about this house, and what was under it for 11 years, and had had a long time to work out what he would do if the day ever came. And the day had come. They would not run. Running was what Vane wanted, running with a signature on his documents and his consideration in the bank, running quiet, leaving the disposition to people who understood these things. And they would not hide, because hiding was Eleanor's mistake, and hiding was where the danger lived, in the dark, in the quiet, in the long way to town and the 40 minutes to the nearest deputy. They would do the opposite. They would do the thing Caleb had counseled the first morning, the thing Delia had decided on, only faster now, and louder, because loud was safe in a way that quiet was not. They would bring it into the light so fast and so wide that there would be nothing left to take in the dark. You cannot steal a thing the whole world is already watching. You cannot make a young mother disappear 40 minutes from the nearest deputy if her face and her name and her story are already on every screen in the country. The light Caleb had warned was dangerous was also, he had come to understand across 11 years of watching, the only true safety, because the carrion families and the soft-handed men did their work in shadow and could not abide the sun. Eleanor chose the dark to be safe, and it killed her by inches, he said. You're going to choose the light to be safe, and it's going to be the most dangerous feeling thing you ever did. and it's going to save your life. You're going to take that box of papers, and you and that lawyer and me, we're going to find the loudest, most honest way there is to say to the whole wide world, here is what was hidden, here is where it came from, here is who it belongs to, and here is a young mother giving it back in the daylight with her name on it. And the second that's true, Garrett Vane and every shark behind him is going to find there's nothing left in the water worth biting, because you can't take what's already been given, and you can't disappear what everybody's already looking at. So they began. It took the rest of that day and most of the next, and it was the hardest work Delia had ever done, harder than the cleaning and the waiting tables and the endless humiliating arithmetic of poverty, because it was work that required her to make herself visible, to step out of the smallness and the invisibility that 8 years of being poor and alone had taught her was the only safety, and to stand up in the light and say, here I am, here is what I have, here is what I am going to do with it. They called Mr. Abernathy, and the lawyer came, frightened, the honest coward, and Caleb made him brave the way he'd said an honest coward could be made brave, by standing next to him and refusing to let him not be. They went through Eleanor's box and matched it against what the lawyer's single trusted appraiser had documented 11 years before, and they built, page by page, a record. And the girl in the blue dress, the small painting taken from a family in a war 2 generations gone, the family that still existed, the grandchild who had said it was never about the money, it was about the proof that the people we came from existed, that one Delia held back from all the rest and set apart, because that one was going to be the first, the very first thing given back, in the daylight, with her name on it. And Caleb had been right that the first step was the whole of the hard road, because once Delia had decided on the girl in the blue dress, once she had a name and a face and a family to give one true thing back to, the abstraction of $440 million in the dark resolved into something she could carry, one painting, one family, one act of returning, and then another, and then another, and the swamp Eleanor had drowned in for 40 years became a road Delia could walk, one step at a time, and not alone. But Garrett Vane had told the truth about one thing. He was the easy one. He was the one who knocked. And on the second night, with the record half-built and the lawyer asleep in a guest room and Caleb dozing in the armchair with his old shotgun across his knees because he had insisted on staying and Delia had not argued, on the second night, very late, Delia woke to the sound her daughter had described that first night. The sound she had told herself was the pipes, the sound of somebody walking, down low, in the house, beneath them, and she lay rigid in the dark with her heart slamming and listened, and it was not the pipes, and it was not the wind, and it was not the old house settling. It was footsteps, real footsteps, on stone, coming up, and Delia understood, in the cold rush of that understanding, that the people who would not knock had not bothered coming up the rutted road and onto the porch where Caleb's shotgun waited, because they did not need to, because there was another way into the house, the oldest way, the way the worn stairs had always known, the way down in the rock that did not begin behind the mirror at all, but came up into it, from somewhere out in the dark hill, somewhere Eleanor had never told the lawyer about and Caleb had never guessed. And the fortune in the vault had never been sealed at the bottom of the stairs the way they all believed. It had only been sealed at the top, and the people who had been circling 11 years had not been waiting to be let in. They had been finding their own way, and they were in the house, below her, coming up, and her daughter was asleep down the hall, and Delia Hartwell came up out of the bed in the dark with her heart a fist of ice, and her whole body already moving toward her child, toward the locked door that she now understood had never been locked at all, not against the thing that was already inside, already climbing, already here. Delia did not turn on a light. That was the first thing the years of survival did for her, before thought, before fear even. The animal knowledge that light makes you a target and dark is the only thing the poor own. She came out of the bed in her bare feet, and she did not reach for the lamp. She reached for the kitchen knife she had felt foolish setting out, and had not put away, and she went down the hall toward her daughter's door in the dark with the footsteps still climbing somewhere below her, slow and certain, the footsteps of men who believed the house was theirs and the woman in it was alone. She reached Posy's door and eased it open and her daughter was there, asleep, safe, and Delia gathered her up blanket and all, and the child stirred and murmured, and Delia put her mouth to her ear and breathed. Quiet, baby, quiet. It's Mommy. We're going to play the quiet game. Not a sound. And Posy, who had learned in a one-bedroom apartment with a ceiling-pounding landlord how to be silent on command, went silent and wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, and Delia carried her down the hall toward the room where Caleb Frost dozed in the armchair with the old shotgun across his knees. He was already awake. Of course he was awake. He had spent 11 years listening for exactly this. He was on his feet in the dark with the shotgun in his hands and his head cocked toward the sound below, and when Delia came in with the child, he put one finger to his lips and pointed, not at the door to the porch, not at the stairs to the front hall, but at the room down the hall, the grandest room, Eleanor's room, the room with the mirror, and Delia understood. The footsteps were coming up the hidden stair. They would come out through the mirror. They did not know the mirror could only be opened from inside the bedroom, from the room itself, by hands that knew the corner to push, or they did know and had a way through anyway. But either way, the place they would emerge was that room, and Caleb meant to be standing in front of it when they did, in the dark, with the shotgun, an old man who fed chickens and had decided 11 years ago what he would do if this day came. Take her out the back, he whispered, so low it was almost only breath. The kitchen door. Down to my truck. It's at the foot of the road. Keys are over the visor. You drive to town. You don't stop. You find the deputy. You tell him everything. I'll hold here. No, Delia breathed. No, you can't. There's more than one. I heard. I know how many there are, Caleb said. I've been listening to that hill 11 years. Take the girl. That's the whole job now. Everything else is just noise. Take her and go. And Delia almost did. Every instinct she had, every year of running, every lesson the hard world had taught her about saving yourself and your child first and last and always, said go, said run, said leave the old man to his shotgun and his choice, and save your daughter. But she stood in the dark with Posy's arms around her neck and the footsteps climbing and Caleb Frost's lined face turned toward the danger, and she thought of Eleanor in the rented room and the lawyer's voice at the kitchen door. Decided as the person you want your daughter to remember you as, and she understood that running now, leaving Caleb, was the same choice as taking the gold in the dark, the choice to save herself by leaving someone else to carry what she was too afraid to carry, and that her whole life had been made of that choice, made by other people, against her, the relatives who stopped answering, the father who left, the world that had decided she didn't matter, and she would be damned, if she would teach her daughter that this was how you survived, by leaving the people who stood with you. There's a phone, she breathed. Mr. Abernathy's phone. It works, he charged it. Take Posy to the kitchen, lock the door, call the deputy, tell them everything. The house, the men, the vault, all of it. Loud, on the line, names. You said it yourself, light is safe. So make it loud. She pressed Posy into the old man's free arm, and the child went, trusting, the way she had trusted the locked door, and Delia took the shotgun out of Caleb's other hand before he could stop her. You can't hold a phone and a shotgun and a 6-year-old, she said. I can hold a shotgun. 8 months on the street, Mr. Frost. You think this is the first time somebody's come for me in the dark? Get my daughter to the kitchen. Make the call. Make it loud. And there was a moment, in the dark, with the footsteps near the top now, when the old man looked at her, and something passed between them, the recognition of one stubborn person by another, and he did not argue, because there was no time, and because she was right, and he took the child and went, fast and silent, toward the kitchen and the phone and the loud, bright safety of the law on the line. And Delia Hartwell turned with the shotgun in her hands toward the door of the grandest room in the house, where, behind the great clouded mirror with its frame of carved leaves and birds and small strange faces, men were climbing up out of the dark to take what she had decided, at last, to give away. She did not go into the room. She stood in the hall, in the dark, with her back against the wall beside the open door, the way she had learned to stand in doorways on the street, where you can see without being seen, where the dark is your friend and not your enemy. And she heard the grinding groan of the great hidden hinge, the sound she had made herself with her own 2 hands, the sound her daughter had made with 2 small ones, and the mirror swung inward into the bedroom, and the cold air poured out, and a flashlight beam swept the room, and a man stepped through, and then another, and a third stayed in the gap, and they were not the soft-handed kind. They were the kind Garrett Vane had warned about, the kind who did not knock, and they moved into the room with the assurance of men who had done this before, who believed the house was empty above and theirs below. And the first one said, "Lo, master bedroom. She'll be down the hall asleep. Quiet now. We get the girl first. You don't have to hurt the woman if you've got the girl. Woman'll do anything you want if you've got the girl." And Delia Hartwell, standing in the dark in the hall with her daughter's safety the only thought left in her whole body, raised the shotgun, and she did not fire it, because firing it into a dark room was the act of a frightened person, and she was past frightened now. She was somewhere cold and clear and very far down, and instead she pulled back both hammers, slow, deliberate, so the sound of it carried that unmistakable double click that every human being on earth understands without being taught. And she said, into the dark, in a voice that did not shake, "The deputy's on the phone right now. He's got your names, he's got the house, he's got the vault, and he's got the road blocked at the bottom of the rise where your car is. There's no quiet anymore. The quiet's over. You came up out of the dark into a house where the law already knows your names, and the only choice you've got left is whether you go back down those stairs right now while you still can, or whether you make me use this and explain to the deputy why I had to. I've got nothing left to lose, gentlemen. I've slept in worse than this and survived worse than you. But you've got everything to lose, because the second this gets loud, the money you came for stops being something you can take in the dark and starts being something the whole world is watching. So go now, while going's still a thing you can do." There was a long silence in the dark room. The flashlight beam wavered, and Delia understood, in that silence, that Caleb had been right about the deepest thing, the thing under all the other things, that these men were creatures of the dark and the quiet, that their entire power was secrecy, that the threat of them depended absolutely on no one knowing, and that the loud, bright fact of a deputy on a phone with their names had done in an instant what no shotgun could have done. It had turned them from predators into the prey, because a man can disappear a woman, alone in a remote house at night. But a man cannot fight the sun, and the sun was coming. The sun was a deputy on a phone and a story about to break, and a young mother who had decided to stand in the light, and the light was the one thing they could not abide. The first man swore, low and vicious. The flashlight beam swept once more around the room, found the open mirror, found the dark stair going down. And then, one by one, the way they had come, the men went back down into the dark, and the last one paused at the mirror, and his flashlight found Delia at last, standing in the hall doorway with the shotgun and her terrible cold calm. And he looked at her a long moment, and he said, "You don't know what you're giving up." And Delia said, "I know exactly what I'm giving up. I did the arithmetic. That's how I know it's worth it." And the man went down into the dark, and the grinding groan came again as the mirror swung shut from below, and the cold air was sealed away. And Delia stood in the dark hallway shaking, finally shaking, and lowered the hammers on the shotgun with hands that had gone numb. And from the kitchen came the sound of her daughter's voice, small and clear, on the phone, telling the deputy, exactly as she'd been told, loud, everything. The deputies came, 3 cars of them, lights and all, picking their way up the rutted road in the last hour before dawn, and they found the car at the bottom of the rise just as Delia had bluffed they would, abandoned now. The men fled on foot into the woods and the hills, and they found, when Caleb showed them, the other entrance, the old way, a half-collapsed adit in the wooded hillside 100 yards from the house. An old mine working from a century before the house was even built, that connected somewhere in the rock to the bottom of the hidden stair, so that the vault had never been sealed at all, only forgotten, and the Carrion family had spent 11 years not waiting to be let in, but quietly clearing the old tunnel, a little at a time, waiting for the old woman to die and a weak heir to take possession. The deputy in charge was a tired, heavy-set man named Brock who had policed the county 30 years and had heard, in a vague way, the old rumors about the Vance place, the way every county has its rumored house. And he stood in the gray dawn looking from the abandoned car, to the old tunnel mouth, to the great gaunt house with all its windows still dark. And he said to Delia, not unkindly, The way the sheriff who had evicted her had not been cruel, only tired. "Ma'am, you understand you bluffed. 3 armed men with a shotgun and a story about a phone call I hadn't even gotten yet when they ran." And Delia said, "I understand it." And Deputy Brock looked at her a long moment and shook his head slowly and said, "That was either the bravest thing I ever heard of or the most foolish, and I've been doing this 30 years and I still can't always tell the difference." And Delia said, "Neither can I, Deputy. I just knew I wasn't going to teach my daughter that you run." And the tired man looked at her again, differently this time, and nodded, and that was all. But it was enough, and from that day the county, which might have treated her as an outsider and a curiosity and a woman who had stumbled into money she didn't earn, treated her instead as one of their own, because word of what she'd said got around the way words do in small places. "I wasn't going to teach my daughter that you run." And a county that had its share of people who'd run, and its share who hadn't, knew the difference when it heard it. And in the daylight, with the deputies in the house, and the lawyer pale and brave and Caleb steady at her side, and Posy asleep at last in the back of a patrol car wrapped in a deputy's jacket, Delia Hartwell did the thing she had decided to do, the loud thing, the bright thing, the dangerous safe thing. She took them down the stairs. She showed them the vault. She showed them the gold stacked like firewood and the cases of paper and the boxes Eleanor had not opened and the paintings, rank on rank, the lost art of a century. And she showed them Eleanor's box, the 40 years of secret tracing, the girl in the blue dress set apart from all the rest. And she said, to the deputies, to the lawyer, to the old man, to the dawn coming up gray in the windows of the great gaunt house, "I want it all documented. I want it all in the light. I want every piece of it traced, and I want everything that can be given back, in the daylight, with my name on it. And whatever's left, whatever's truly clean, whatever the law says is mine to keep, I'll keep, for my girl, and not $1 more." And the lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, the honest coward made brave at last, took off his rimless glasses and did not polish them, only looked at her with his old tired eyes gone bright, and said, "Eleanor was right about you. She was right about you all along. She said the right person would ask, and the right person would give. She found the right person." And Delia, who had not wept in the dark of the vault, who had not wept facing the men in the night, wept now, in the gray dawn, for Eleanor Vance who had died in a rented room, because she could not do this thing, and for herself, who could, and for her daughter, asleep in a patrol car, who would grow up knowing that her mother had stood in the light. The story broke, the way Caleb had said it must, loud and wide, and the loudness was the safety. Within a day the road up the rise was choked with news vans, and within 2 days Delia Hartwell's face and name and story were on every screen in the country. The evicted single mother who had inherited a sealed house worth $250 and found $440 million in a hidden vault and had chosen, against every reason and every temptation, to bring it into the light and give back what was stolen. And the Carrion family, the Vanes, the soft-handed Garrett, and the men who would not knock, found that Caleb had been exactly right, that there was nothing left in the water worth biting, that you cannot steal a thing the whole world is already watching and cannot disappear a woman whose face is on every screen. And they melted back into the shadow they had come from. And the deputies who could not find the men in the hills could at least make certain, with the whole nation watching, that no harm came to the mother and the child, because harm in the dark is one thing and harm in the full glare of the sun is another, and the sun, now, was everywhere. It was not simple after that, and Delia would never pretend it was, because the right road is never the simple road. That was a thing she had learned in the dark and would spend the rest of her life knowing. The tracing took years. The girl in the blue dress was the first, and Caleb had been right that the first was the whole of the hard road, because once Delia had flown, terrified, in an airplane for the first time in her life, with Posy's hand in hers, to a city she had never seen, and had placed a small painting no bigger than a book into the hands of an old man who was the grandchild of the people it had been stolen from, an old man who held it and wept and said, exactly as the interview had said, it was never about the money, it was about the proof that they existed, that they were people. Once she had done that one true thing and seen what it was, the rest of the road, however long, was only walking. There were museums, and there were families, and there were governments, and there were claims that took lawyers years to untangle, and there were paintings the world had believed lost for a century that hung again, at last, in the daylight, with a small plaque that said returned through the efforts of Delia Hartwell, and Eleanor Vance's name was on those plaques too, because Delia insisted, because the old woman had spent 40 years too afraid to act, and had at the very last done the one brave thing of leaving it to someone who would, and that, Delia had decided, counted for something, counted for a name on a plaque, counted for not being forgotten as only a thief's widow but remembered as the woman who, in the end, made the giving back possible. There were harder days in the long road of the giving back than the day with the men in the night, though they did not look hard from the outside, and Delia learned that the slow grinding right thing costs more than the single brave one. There were the months when the lawyers for an insurance company that had paid out on a painting 80 years ago argued that the painting was therefore theirs and not the family's, and Delia sat through depositions in cold conference rooms in a borrowed good dress and learned, word by expensive word, how the world arranges itself to keep what it has taken. And there were nights she came home to the great lit house and lay awake wondering whether she had been a fool, whether Eleanor's dark had been wiser than her light, whether she should have taken Garrett Vane's clean exit and his consideration and let people who understood these things handle the disposition of what was below. There were the relatives who surfaced once her face was on every screen, the ones who had stopped answering when she was poor, suddenly full of warmth and memory and need. And Delia learned to tell the ones who wanted her from the ones who wanted the gold. And it was not always easy, and she got it wrong sometimes, and was hurt, and learned. And there were the letters, thousands of them, from strangers, some of them threats, and some of them begging, and some of them, the ones she kept, from people who said only that her choice had let them believe again that a person could be given everything and not be ruined by it. And those letters, Delia came to understand, were a kind of giving back too, were the painting placed in the weeping old man's hands made 1,000-fold, the proof not that beautiful things had existed, but that goodness could, that a person could stand in the dark in front of a fortune and choose the light, and that the choosing could be seen, and could spread, the way light spreads, into rooms a person never enters. And through all of it, the slow years and the cold conference rooms and the letters and the doubt, the thing that held her was the thing Caleb had given her on the first morning, the road made of single steps walked next to someone, because she was never in the cold conference rooms alone. The lawyer was beside her, and Caleb was at the end of the rutted road with his chickens and his Sunday suppers and his hard, wise, steadying counsel. And Posy was growing, watching, learning, and Delia understood that she was not only walking the road but laying it down for her daughter to walk after her, that every hard right choice made in the light was a stone set in a path that Posy would one day walk on, and that this, the laying down of the road for the child, was the deepest reason of all to choose the light, deeper even than safety, deeper even than the giving back, because a mother does not only live her life, she builds, out of her choices, the world her child will have to be a person in, and Delia Hartwell had decided, on a stone floor in the dark, what kind of world that would be. And there was money left. That was the thing the simple stories never told, that doing the right thing did not mean ending in a rented room with nothing the way Eleanor had, because Eleanor's nothing had not been righteousness. It had been her failure to ever do the giving back in the daylight, her choice of the dark, her 40 years of hiding that had let the guilt eat everything. Delia did the giving back, and when it was done, when everything that could be traced had been traced, and everything that could be returned had been returned, there remained the gold, much of it, because gold has no name and no history that can be read off its surface, gold that had been bought and melted and recast across a century until no court on earth could say whose it had once been, and the law, after the lawyers had argued it for 2 years, said that the gold was clean, was hers, was the lawful property of Delia Hartwell, free and clear, and it came, after the lawyers and the taxes and the costs of 2 years of doing the right thing the slow, expensive way, to a sum that Delia, who had once had $7 in her wallet, could not entirely make her mind hold even now. But she could say where every dollar of it came from, and she could say how every dollar of it had been made clean, and that, Caleb had told her on the first morning, was the only way money was ever truly washed, not by spending it on good, the way Eleanor had tried for 40 years, but by being able to stand in the daylight and account for all. The way through, without dreams, in the great gaunt house that she had made, at last, into a home. She did not move away. People expected her to. The reporters asked her, again and again, whether she would buy a house somewhere warm, somewhere far from the remote county and the rutted road, and the hill with its old forgotten tunnel. And Delia said no. Every time. No. This is our house. This is where we live, and she meant it. She fixed it. She unboarded the windows and let the light in, all of it, every window, because the house had been dark long enough. She fixed the gutters and the sagging porch and brought the dead garden back to life, and the great gaunt haunted house on the rise became, over the seasons, a house that children waved at instead of dared each other to approach, a warm house, a lit house, a house where a girl named Posy grew up running through rooms that opened into other rooms, climbing the tower stair her mother now let her climb, playing in the window seats and the alcoves. A house built for a child's exploration finally, given a child to explore it. And the mirror, the great clouded mirror in the grandest room. Delia had the deputies and the lawyer help her seal the hidden stair below it for good, the tunnel filled and the old way closed. And then she left the mirror itself exactly where it was, on its hidden pivot, a door that now opened onto nothing, onto solid-filled rock. And she kept it because she wanted to remember. She wanted Posy to be able to push that corner someday when she was grown and feel the great thing swing and know that. Her mother had stood at the threshold of the dark and chosen, every single day, the light. Caleb Frost came to supper every Sunday until he was too old to drive himself, and then Delia sent a car for him. And then, when he was very old, she had a small, bright cottage built for him at the edge of the property, within sight of the chickens he could no longer keep, and he lived his last years there, the best neighbor and the truest friend. The old man who had washed a house for 11 years out of love for a dead woman and had stayed to help a living one do the impossible thing. And when he died, Delia buried him on the rise within sight of the house, and Posy, grown now, helped carry him. And at the grave, Delia said the thing she had been saving to say, the thing she had never quite found the moment to say while he lived, that he had been wrong about one thing, only one, in all his hard wise counsel, that he had said he was just an old man and a truck and not worth much, and that he had been the most worth much thing in her whole life, save her daughter, that without him, she would have run that night, would have left, would have become forever the kind of person who saves herself in the dark, and that he had stood next to her and not let her not be brave, the way he had stood next to the lawyer, and that this, the standing next to, was the rarest and the most valuable thing one person could ever give another, worth more than any vault, more than all the gold stacked like firewood in the dark. And she put on his grave a plaque, the way she had put plaques on the returned paintings, and the plaque did not say chicken farmer, and it did not say neighbor. It said, he stood in the light, and stood next to those who were afraid to. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, lived to see most of the giving back done, and confessed to Delia, near his own end, that the 11 years he had carried Eleanor's secret had been the great shame of his life. The honest coward who knew the right thing and helped hide the wrong one because the wrong one paid so well, and that helping Delia do the giving back in the daylight had been the one thing that let him die without that shame. And Delia held the old man's dry, cool hand, the hand that had handed her the key, and told him that he had been brave at the end, that being made brave counts as brave, that not everyone gets to be brave alone and unprompted, and that there is no shame in needing someone to stand next to you, that this was the whole lesson of the whole thing, that nobody does the impossible right thing alone, that Eleanor's deepest mistake had not been the keeping or even the hiding but the doing alone, the 40 years alone in the dark with the choice she could not make, because she had no one standing next to her. And that the difference between Eleanor's ending and Delia's was not that Delia was braver or better, but that Delia had not been alone, had had an old man and his shotgun, and a coward made brave, and a 6-year-old's 2 small hands on a mirror, and that this was not luck, it was the thing itself, it was the answer, it was how the impossible right thing actually gets done in the actual world, never alone, always next to someone. And the wealth, the clean wealth, the gold that had no name, became, in Delia Hartwell's hands, the thing Eleanor had spent 40 years unable to make it become. It became light. Delia built, with it, a thing she named for no one, not for herself and not for Eleanor and not even for Caleb. A thing she named simply the Daylight Fund, because she had learned what daylight was worth, and the fund did one thing and did it without limit. It found families who had lost everything and were one notice away from the curb, single mothers in one-bedroom apartments with ceiling-pounding landlords, fathers sleeping in cars with children's coats spread over both of them like thin, shared blankets, the invisible ones, the ones the world had decided did not matter, and it gave them not charity, not a soup kitchen and a cot, but the thing Delia herself had been given by a dead stranger across the gap of death, a roof, a real roof, a home, given free and clear, with the only condition being the one Eleanor had put on her, that you could not sell it for a year, that you had to live in it first, that you had to learn what it was to be given a roof before you decided what to do with one. And Delia ran it herself, every day, out of an office in the great lit house on the rise, and she interviewed each family personally, and in each one she saw herself, $7 and a daughter and a quarter tank of gas, and to each one she told the same thing, not to inspire them, though it did, but to give them the only true thing she had learned in the dark beneath the house. The first family the fund ever housed was a mother named Renata and her 2 boys, who had been sleeping in a church parking lot in a car that no longer ran, and Delia drove out herself to bring them the keys, and Renata stood in the doorway of the small, clean house with the keys in her hand and could not make herself step inside, the way Delia had once stood at the back door of the great gaunt house, unable to make herself believe it was hers. And Delia stood next to her on the threshold, the way Caleb had stood next to her, and said, "Go in, it's yours." And when Renata finally went in and her boys ran shouting through the rooms the way Posy had run through the great house, Delia stood on the step and wept, because she understood that this, exactly this, the threshold and the keys and the running children, was what Eleanor Vance had meant when she said she wanted to leave the house to someone who needed a roof and had never had one, and that the dead woman's cruelest gift had become, at last, in the daylight, through 100 families and then 1,000, the kindest thing that her stolen sour fortune had ever done or ever could. That the wanting is not the sin. That everyone wants, and the wanting is only love, and being alive, and being a parent. That the only part that is ever yours to answer for is what you do with the wanting. And that the person you become is built, every single day, out of the choices you make when it is hard, when it costs you, when you are standing alone in the dark in front of a fortune that no one would ever know you took. She told them, bring it into the light, whatever it is, whatever you are carrying in the dark because the dark feels safe. Bring it into the light, and find someone to stand next to you while you do, because the dark is where the danger lives, and the light, however frightening, is the only true safety there is, and it is the only place, in the end, where you can look your child in the eye. On the last evening of the story, years on, an old woman, now herself though not so old as Eleanor had been, Delia Hartwell sat on the wide repaired porch of the great lit house with her grown daughter beside her, and the sun was going down copper and long across the hills the way it had the first evening. The evening she had stopped the car on the rise and seen the ruin, and her daughter had said it's a castle, and she had said it's a wreck, and her daughter had insisted it's a castle, and been right, because a thing is what you decide to make it, a ruin or a castle, a curse or a home, a fortune in the dark or a fund full of daylight. And Posy, grown, who ran the fund now alongside her mother, who had been the one to push the mirror with 2 small hands and open the whole of their lives onto a choice, asked her mother the question the reporters had asked 1,000 times, and that Posy had never once asked, because she had lived it and did not need to. She asked it now only because the light was beautiful and her mother was old, and some questions you ask just to hear the answer in the voice of the person you love while you still can. Do you ever regret it, Mama? Giving it back? Do you ever wonder what it would have been like to just have kept it all? And Delia Hartwell looked out at the hills going copper in the last of the light, the hills with the old closed tunnel and Caleb's grave and the house she had made into a home, and she thought about the $7 and the rest stop parking lot and the gold stacked like firewood in the dark, and the men who would not knock, and the small painting placed into the hands of a weeping old man. It was never about the money. It was about the proof. And Eleanor in the rented room, and the lawyer's voice at the kitchen door. Decided as the person you want your daughter to remember you as. And she reached over and took her grown daughter's hand, the hand that had pushed the mirror, and she said the truest thing she knew. The thing 40 years and a fortune and a hard road walked one step at a time and never alone had taught her. No, baby, she said. I never wonder. Because I know exactly what it would have been like. It would have been like Eleanor. Everything in the dark, and me alone with it. And you growing up watching me carry a thing I couldn't set down and couldn't pick all the way up, and the wanting eating us both alive, and the gold under the floor turning every good thing sour, and the both of us safe and rich and dead inside, in the dark, forever. I did the arithmetic, Posy. Once, on a stone floor, in the dark, with you asleep upstairs, I did the whole arithmetic. And the answer was always the same as it ever is. The treasure was never the gold. The gold was the test. The treasure was getting to sit here, with you, in the light, with nothing under the floor and nothing in the dark and nothing I can't account for, and look at you, and have you look back at me, and know exactly who's looking. That's the treasure. That's the only one there ever was. And I'd give the 440 million again, every dollar, every single time, to keep it. And the sun went down, and the lights of the house came on, all of them, every window, because the house had been dark long enough, and a mother and her daughter sat together in the warm light on the porch of a home, and that, in the end, after the dark and the descent and the men in the night and the long, bright, dangerous road of the giving back, was the whole of the treasure, and it could not be stolen, and it did not need to shine to matter, and no one would ever come up the stairs to take it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.